In episode 11 of EB Spoke, the podcast, Daniel Scheufler and I continue the conversation about building good habits, but in a very important context, writing secure software. There's only so much software and automation can do to help make sure software is secure. The rest relies on us humans to do the right thing every time. And what better way to get better than to form good habits? So on my last episode of EB Spoke, the podcast, we had Daniel on, and we recorded it in late November, and I was in a theme called New You November. And then, of course, you didn't hear the podcast till December. And either way you think about it, both November and December are a time when we're all thinking about New Year's resolutions. What behaviors do we want to do in the new year, whether it's health, whether it's work, whether it's anything, right? So everything we talked about was around habits, forming good habits in the new year, getting rid of bad habits in the new year. And we took that to another level of team. So we're back here together. Those grand ideas have come back into reality. And the ones that stuck, the ones that we took your advice from a habit formation, those are still rolling. Everything else is probably fallen aside. Curious on your thoughts. Habits, are they here? Are they gone?
Well, kind of going back to that key advice, right? The key advice we took was from Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the thought was break it down, right? Don't pull the moonshot of a habit small. Just master the art of showing up. That's the stuff that gets sticky. But that's not good enough, right? I could make sticky habits all day and not actually make any meaningful progress. So the stuff that really will stick with you is the stuff that hooks deep into what you believe, what you value. These are called identity-based habits, not the I want to lose 20 pounds, so I want to lose 20 pounds, but the I want to be a healthier person. And so I'm going to begin adapting my lifestyle, adapting my day-to-day choices so that what emerges over time is I am becoming a healthier person, not just the hit a mark to get a number. And when you apply that to the teams, we're not talking about individual values anymore. Most often we end up calling this something like team culture because it's reflective of the values we as a group are supposed to have. But there's a fun little twist that I've seen happen on that. The company values are plastered across the wall. But does the junior engineer sitting next to you in the cubicle actually value those? Or are they just kind of complying with the theater that they've seen? And to be fair to the poor junior engineer, it's not their fault. They don't know what it looks like to build a trust-oriented culture. They may have never been in the workforce where trust was a big deal.
Exactly.
So how are you showing them? And this is where the habits I see most commonly for teams fall flat. Like, you get an agile transformation, capital A, capital T. Aside from knowing from the start as a senior engineer now that that's almost doomed to fail, they're almost always just same behaviors, new labels, because the change wasn't hooked to what we believe. We didn't build it out. It was, inflicted on the team, to borrow the wording from Sooner, Safer, Happier.
Let me dive in right there because one of the things that we just barely scratched the surface hinted at is the idea of secure software development as well.
Yep.
And so you and I talked about focusing on that on today's conversation, but I want to start with a question there because things you believe in, right? If you don't believe in it, then it's hard to form a habit. It's hard to be good at it.
Yep.
We all believe in writing secure software out loud.
Out
right?
loud, yes.
But we might also believe in something else with, writing software rapidly, like getting tasks done, getting through stories, whatever it is. So it's not to say that we don't believe in writing secure software, but maybe a priority list issue there.
And I think calling it out like that is a great way to detense the situation, right? Because it's very easy to state, did you do it? If you did it, you valued it. If you didn't do it, you don't value it. That's not always the whole story. I might value dessert. I really like it, but I chose not to eat it today. Why? Because I valued that health habit I'm trying to establish more, or that I valued it on a certain limit. What trade-offs are you willing to make? That's the question your priorities list is answering. And very often, security gets forgotten because, am I really thinking about, how could this go wrong while I'm in the middle of trying to figure out what right looks like? Unfortunately, most of the time, no. That's why we tend to have like an IT security team dedicated to that because we need someone deep and in the weeds on all the ways people can break into our systems or, into something, because it is a specialized mindset.
A little background on why I think that writing secure software and why habit formation of the person and team really do belong together. I spent a lot of time doing software security assessments, looking at code that's been written, trying to find those things that people didn't think of, right? Or conversely, looking at breaches. Why did they happen? Most of these big news breaches do fall back to software. And software, of course, is written by humans or installed by humans or patched by humans, all of which are procedures that we do. But when I'm looking at the code itself that people have written, I see almost always common mistakes, right? A person has developed a particular habit in how they write their code, and that may or may not reflect good, secure coding practices. Or conversely, they may skip adding things so they haven't formed a habit around. Maybe we should always do a permission check on every API call, right?
Yep.
Now, take a step back as technologists. There's other ways to do that don't rely on the human. There are frameworks and patterns and security products that I can bolt on the sides and all that. But then I'm leaning on something else, which is going to have its own problems.
And it's only going to expose the holes you know about.
Yes, exactly. So we still want good coding practices. We still want those habits to form around that, because every layer needs to be secure, not just the one that's on the front.
No, exactly. And when you start talking about bridging this into the habits, the manifestation of the habit is actions, right? But it's the creation from a value or an understanding held in the head of some developer somewhere. Sure, you can bolt on topics to kind of account for the people aren't this specialized. So running dynamic application scanning as part of your build process. Great option. I don't have to spend a person's time trying to hammer on this thing. I'm just going to teach a bot to do the 38 odd weird attacks I never thought of, but this will save me from. And it'll catch some of the simple ones we well know, like SQL injection attacks, right? Hey, this form you didn't sanitize. Ooh, easy to go fix.
Right. But why didn't you sanitize it?
Why didn't I sanitize it? And so now you have to get into the question, okay, so that becomes almost immediately a design level problem, because it's not an execution problem. Because, okay, I was rushed for time. Okay, they at least knew they were supposed to, but you can solve that by adjusting your expectations on timing or adding it to your definition of done and having it checked. But if you didn't even think I should do it, it catches something by surprise. The question becomes a knowledge problem.
Yeah.
In part. I'm going to take a tangent here real quick and talk about one time where I saw a team taking a set of behaviors that approached and handled both a knowledge problem and a behavior gap at the same time. But it'll sound a little weird because what they used was shame. Now, especially in Western societies, we don't talk honor shame a ton. It doesn't register for us. But for our operating definition, I'm going to use shame of the social embarrassment kind. Not the you're permanently shamed, you can't be here with us anymore, but the you had a faux pas and we had a laugh about it. And this actually comes from my personal experience at a telemedicine group. We're walking around with PHI and HIPAA guided all sorts of information accessible from my developer laptop. Naturally, security of the physical hardware, as well as the electronic information, is extremely important. Like, we could get our butts sued out from under us if we get this wrong. So, of course, you want your devs to have a very high standard of data security. How did we do this? Well, one day, having come back from a quick talk with my boss, I found out that I had sent an email to the entire department titled, I am Ninja. Know what this was about, but I got ribbed about it at lunch saying, you left your computer unlocked. I'm like, oh, nuts. And so it became a game. Hey, see if you can catch the new guy because you forgot to lock his computer. And is there any harm for one of your colleagues jumping in and sending a note to the rest of the team of I am Ninja? It's you got God, right? It's not quite as disrespectful as a kick me sign, but it didn't feel great at the time. But you can bet your butt I didn't forget to lock my computer for at least 2 months. This kind of creates a self-reinforcing loop of my behavior changed because of my team's values. One of my teammates had my back covered. And that model, I think, is one of the better ones for how we can approach secure software. We need someone on the team to have an understanding of what that really looks like, to help us think through the implications of the choices we made. The most common, obvious time to do this would be during pull request reviews, or like the review before code gets merged into main. That's the moment someone who didn't write the code should intentionally sit down with the security hat and say, I could break that, I could break that, I could break that, and talk and use it as a teaching opportunity. Now, it could use like a points system or something like that of, I found 5, whereas the best quality we've ever had was only 1. Hey, the team now has a leaderboard. It's not shame, but it's this positive enforcement external that helps change individual behaviors because the team values security.
It's the days without accidents sign, right?
Exactly. And so speaking on that, that days without accidents usually is used to talk about safety. But let's be honest, security in software is safety in software.
Absolutely. Yeah, same thing.
Now, have you heard of the safety 1, safety 2 concept?
No, I have not.
So
if I have, I'll find out later.
No problem. So the way I was introduced to this was out of the book Sooner, Safer, Happier, talking about how to essentially apply an agile mindset to agility and actually create these systems. But the safer part deals with 2 kinds of safety. Avoid the bad, pursue the good. Safety only happens not when you just avoid all of the negative things that could happen or all the risks, but when the necessary things are present. So things like psychological safety fall into safety 2. If that's not present, you cannot have a safe system. Safety harnesses actually being worn, people people wearing their hard hats or not, that's a safety 1 type concern. Avoid the negative. So when we're talking about security, we need to have both kinds of safety in place to really get effective software written.
Yeah. I was almost thinking when you talked about avoid the negative and pursue the positive, the idea of if there's a trip hazard in the middle of a walkway, you can avoid it. You could walk around it.
Yep, but the safety problem is still there.
Yeah, but better pick it up and put it away, solve the underlying issue, whatever it is. And now we're pursuing a positive solution as opposed to just avoiding.
Exactly. And that usually takes the form of the coding refactors or what have you. So if you want to know whether your team values safety, when was the last time anyone refactored code to make it safer?
Yeah, I have a great example where in a code review found basically legacy code. It lived, it was still in the repo, it was still there. Nobody called it, so it had never been refactored. Well, we avoided that trip hazard, right? Because nobody uses that code.
Until that new junior dev starts trying to find the call.
Yeah, exactly. New junior dev's like, oh, they've already got a function for that. I'm just going to use that. And suddenly, yes, people start tripping.
Yep. And so I think you'll agree with this, right? The only perfectly secure code is no code. It's the only bug-free code, too. Right. And so actively cleaning up your mess, throwing out the old code, that's what version control is for, right? Source control will handle remembering it used to be there. Throw it out because it is actively safer for your system not to leave the broken walkway still connected.
People start tripping. Yep. Exactly. And I think we still have that context of habit here, right? Because if you have a habit of picking up the thing that shouldn't be there and putting it where it should be, that's a great habit to have. You can also have the opposite habit of always walking around and, never stepping on it, never tripping on it. That's a habit as well that I know to avoid. And so, if I'm thinking about, again, coding practices, if I'm thinking about legacy code, old code, do I have a habit?
Which is unfortunately where a lot of these come in.
Have that habit of going ahead and just cleaning more appropriately, putting a tick in the backlog so that we can come back. Probably shouldn't be making those changes if they're unrelated to the task I'm working on.
Maybe. Let's play that idea.
Yep.
Naturally, if we want a high productive developer, we want them focused chiefly on add value. We definitively know software left alone grows weeds. It ages, right? Just take an easy example. I'm using such and such a library, and now there's a known vulnerability in it because someone figured out how to break it. If I don't update, I now have a problem. I can't just expect that not to manifest. I have to understand these things are aging all the time unless I am constantly trimming and keeping it up. And by constantly trimming and keeping it up, that's those moments I'm not doing net new value. I am maintaining value. Now, I'm going to jump out to finance here real quick and then come back to earth. There's a different name for that kind of expenditure because most IT is funded on project basis. Not my favorite model, but the most common one. CapEx is net new value. Go get new thing. OpEx is maintain the thing I'm using. But a developer rightly working on the software will do both at the same time. Hey, I need to add a new function. Cool, that means I need to refactor this thing.
Sure.
That's OpEx and CapEx at the same moment, at least from the actual practicals of what we're doing. If they're in the middle of doing that, that's the right time to go update your package if you happen to touch anything that happens to call it. But it's not strictly related to the CapEx work they're supposed to be doing. It's just part of keeping the software tuned and therefore extending what should be a capital resource.
Totally agree. If it's in scope, you should be doing it.
Yep.
My earlier example is also you might stumble across things that are out of scope, just happen to be at the bottom of the file that nobody ever goes. Nobody scrolls to the bottom, and that's where all the dust cobwebs have collected.
And of course, that's where our greatest security risks start coming in because they're the things we haven't looked at in forever, but they're also the least likely to actually get done.
And the person doesn't even work for the company.
Right? The guy with the knowledge of how this was working and why is gone. But the reason why it got to that state is because it kept falling to the bottom of the pile. One of the realizations I have found is that your security habit is deeply interconnected with not only the mindset and the education you help your team to have, but in your maintenance habit. Because most security isn't a value added. It's a secure, right? Keep it safe. Keep it here. Maintain. So if you don't have a team with a really strong maintenance streak, you can expect to see security problems in that software too. Doesn't matter how good your CapEx expenditure run is or how fast you're doing it, you're going to run into a problem. The reason why I focus on maintenance is because in my mind, the way this whole process works is you get a junior engineer and he starts by fix the code, right? That's all he can focus on. Get this one step done. After a while, he kind of understands the code as a tool. He knows which tools to reach for a little bit. And so he moves on to a mid-level engineer and he's given, hey, go complete this arc of work. Okay, and so he's got a slightly wider view. And as you go to senior, it's wider still, even among the selection of the right tools to know if definitively it's the right one. But it's in that mid to senior transition where if he's not been exposed to this is a problem because you can't expect him to have in his toolkit the security tools. As the senior, I'm expecting to have them because he's the only one with the perspective to understand where in the flow this security hole entered and why it was a problem. And it's also those kind of guys you're depending on teaching your junior engineers through experience how to avoid that problem. Well, how's the senior engineer going to get there? He gets it because he gets a maintenance ticket as a middling engineer that says, I need to repair this. He sees what the problem looks like.
I'm going to add, it becomes very important with what you just said, especially when you talked about project-based software.
Yep.
Software maintenance has to be part of the idea of a cost of software, right?
Yes,
it's not just
100%.
the cost to build. It is also, you and I have seen that ignored more times than we would like to admit.
Yes.
So off topic, but super important to making sure people realize how will we fix that?
Yep. And so
make sure you have line items for both.
If I were given a fresh team trying to say, okay, help them build a security habit, I would be taking the first look at their maintenance backlog. For starters, right? Awareness. Do they have any scan at all or anyone on the team with any bent towards software security? If they don't have one, I'm looking at tools to help them get that information. If they do,
training,
exactly, right? Like I'm going to go build a basic foundation of I can expect them to actually understand what this looks like. After training, okay, now what do we do? Well, I'm going to start first by action. I'm not going to start by trying to convince them it's valuable. I am, if I'm leading the team, going to prioritize some things I know are security work in amongst the other things and insist that the maintenance not get moved in favor of, the latest value thing that rolled over. Because without the experience of what does this look like, I can't expect them to write better versions of that in the future. They're just going to keep doing the pattern they know works. And so until I can incorporate secure as part of their definition of working and done, and I can't explain to them secure unless they have the experience to know what unsecure looks like. I can't expect them to do it until I have given them the experience, the chance to understand, like the knowledge, to be able to link that then to value to the thing they care about. Oftentimes, my favorite developers to work with are the ones who say, I want to get this done so the customers can use it, and I thrive on the feedback of this was so useful. Fantastic. So I'm going to sell them security on. This stops your customers from doing that or makes them afraid to use it.
Exactly. So I want to do something that's basically tying the habits that we were talking about last year. I expect a lot of security practitioners who are listening to this, especially if they work for a security vendor, are going to say, well, there's products for that. I can tell you, what code do you need to go look at? What's stale? What's not called? What libraries are outdated? There are all these products that you can just bolt on solutions.
You can buy all the tools you want.
And I'm going to connect, if I want to lose weight, I'm going to stand on the scale every day to measure my progress. And the number goes up, and I'm going to get a weight bench and a treadmill, and my watch track my heart rate. I have so much data now about the problem, but it's not necessarily has anything to do to accomplish.
It hasn't become action yet. Did you know that there's actually a requirement on how often the seatbelt buckle will bing in your car?
Makes sense, sure, yeah.
Because what they found was if they just let it keep going, ding, ding, it would encourage the wrong behavior. People would ignore the signal or would buckle their buckle behind them just to get it to stop.
Or cut the wires.
Right? Like there's all kinds of ways to work around a signal that has become an annoyance. For your signal, the tool producing this report, to have value, a person has to act on it. And it can't keep telling them the same thing forever because it will just become steady state. We learn to ignore that as part of human psyche, right? A waste of space to keep thinking about, is that light green? Is that light green? I don't care. It's been green since I turned it on. If it starts blinking, hold on, that's weird. So when you say I can bolt on these tools, sure, you can.
And you should, just for disclosure, having information is important, but
yes, because if you don't have the information, you can't act, but you can't just assume problem. Running the scan is not the same as fixing the problem.
Yep, 80% of our code hasn't been touched in 4 years. Next feature. I'll write some new code. If you write new code, eventually that number gets smaller.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Or if I can outright my current code, yeah. But once you get the thing that was built 10 years ago, but is still the thing all of the plants are running the code on, and then all of a sudden trying to consider the security fix gets real scary. Because not only do I have this big red number of you got 80 massive security vulnerabilities in software run by 80% of my company, and some of that's in mission critical functionality.
Yep. We got tools, we got data, we have an underlying belief that I want to write secure code.
And this loops us right back to that starting point of the conversation we had where you mentioned, hey, so maybe this is a priorities list problem. And I think that's where we need to camp. So, Erik, who have you seen writing the priority list for your devs when it comes to secure code?
Product owners, executives who aren't even at the table.
My boss's boss's boss.
Yep.
They're the ones because, and here's where it gets really scary, right? Like that CapEx, OpEx conversation comes back up. The projects you choose to prioritize and the maintenance you choose to defer sends a very clear signal of what will get me value to your employees. You have to assume by default they're there to maximize their results for their efforts. Nobody comes into work thinking, I want to do a bad job for my employer today. And if they do, that's a different problem.
Exactly.
Just like that assumption of they would prefer to write secure code, but they would also prefer to keep their jobs. They prefer their boss not to yell at them about a deadline. They'd prefer not to be asked to do another death march. The company culture, whether it values, frankly, quality in what it does, will determine. And yes, we're not saying you have to not value timing and consistency and predictability or whatever else might be important in your industry. But you can't inspect quality in. You can't, frankly, inspect security in. It has to be something we actively state we will buy and we will sacrifice for. Because if it's not that, you can count on it getting dropped.
And so how do we move that conversation to before the breach, before the bad thing? Because every company is really good at what you just said after the bad thing happens.
Oh, yes.
It is amazing how we have a culture where if any developer in the organization sees a security issue, they escalate that to the top and we'll get it. Those are great words after the breach.
And I think this goes back to that whole, you can have the tools, you can have the words, you can have the stuff plastered all over. You can shout it to the rooftops. But how do you treat the first person who brought it up? How did you treat the person who pulled the andon cord and stopped the line?
Yeah.
If you treated them with curiosity, hey, thanks for telling us there's something we can improve. What's up? Is a very different conversation than why'd the line stop?
Yeah. Why did we miss our deployment date? Why'd that feature not go out? Why?
And unfortunately, because of the human psyche, why, despite being the right question to be asking, hey, what happened, doesn't sound the same as why. Why, much to my frustration, sounds accusatory. And so this whole security thing immediately goes right back down to the messy humans in the room. How have they been rewarded, right? Every complex system has a degree of memory. And so you can bet the manager before you and how he treated the senior most of your team is going to be affecting how your team interacts with you, despite the fact that you weren't in the room at the time. You don't know if the senior architect-y guy you had and hired in from another company had a terrible experience trying to manage their QA last time. And so now, of course, their relationship with their QA is super sour and they will not let them touch it until they are certain it's perfect. Sitting in that team, you have to kind of tease those out.
And you used the word reward, and you didn't use the word punishment,
but that's the obvious other side of the coin, yeah.
Yeah, which are the fundamental building blocks, those habits that we're trying to form.
They're the levers. Sorry. So I can put some more on the punishment side or carrot and stick. It's every manager understands the concept, but how do we use them? Because, frankly, avoidance of pain is a reward. We talked about this last time with our habits conversation, right? Make the pain stop is a reward which forms a habit.
Yep.
What pain does your team feel? And I start with pain because, let's be real honest, people are more keen to avoid pain than they are to pursue reward.
Sure. Especially if the pain is present.
Like, my hand's on fire. If you as a leader are not deeply aware of the pain your team is feeling, you will not have a great chance of being able to modify the reward system in a meaningful capacity. If it is more painful for them to admit there's a problem with the deadline by an unpleasant conversation with an executive or pushback saying, no, we could totally do this, you're just worried for no reason, or being dismissed. Or, honestly, and this one goes much deeper, a hit to their personal identity. I am a good developer. You wrote insecure code. If you're not aware of how that's being received by the individuals on your team, you're not going to be able to move it. And a lot of those, as you already heard, are kind of hidden below the surface. They're not going to be talking to you about this. We don't like to talk about discomfort or unpleasant conversations in the workplace. We'd much rather just get it done. But we have to dig into that so we can pull out secure. Secure can't just be the reward. It can't be the stick because they've already got a plenty of sticks and you're not going to be louder than the guy shouting at them about the deadline. So the goal would naturally be like, okay, so go fix the system. Yeah, that's politics.
That's easy.
Good idea. But how can we practically hit that?
Buy everybody a book and have them read it, and then next week we'll be fine.
Yeah. So for this, I'm going to lean on a couple of ideas, both from the Atomic Habits, but Sooner, Safer, Happier, start with why. If we're talking about information, if you say the thing 3 times more than you think you should, you're about a third of the way there, borrowing from Simon Sinek. Over-communicate. Why do we do this? Why does it matter? Why? When they then actually take the first step, the first person tries to call you and say, hey, there might be a problem. How do you respond? This is your early adopter. That person you need not to treat with kid gloves.
Yes, exactly.
Celebrate them. Set them up to win and then make certain when they've won, you get them to do a victory lap around the team so people can see it. Not a literal victory lap running in the office might not be spacious enough.
Back to our original health habit. Run a victory lap.
Oh, yeah, there you go. And hey, I am all for standing walking meetings. if you don't help them visibly win for the team, you can't create the little seed of reward for the next person to try. So we can't talk secure software as the whole thing. That's the macro. That's the moonshot level habit. What does it take for the first person to offer security-related feedback on a PR? What does it take for the first person to say, hey, a new security vulnerability showed up on our scan to the team during stand-up? What's that tiny little first change? And how did you respond? How do you reward it? Because we can't compel a values change. We can get to compliance. We can make it pleasant. But at the end of the day, we don't want compliance. Compliance really is only there when someone's watching. And we can't watch enough to make certain that the code is secure. Because what we want is a change in how people think about it. We want commitment to secure. We want commitment to an outcome. And then them to use their creativity when we're not watching, when we didn't even think of there being a problem, for them to catch it, see it, fix it. Like, that's the ideal.
I'm going to crack open that idea of compliance and somebody's watching and how it relates, because if I'm writing software, I can show we've done pull requests. And look, the people who approved the pull request weren't the person who wrote the code. All good practices that my repo actually records the evidence for. So when the auditors come back and look, we know they're looking. We know that the evidence is being recorded, that 2 people looked at the code, but maybe we don't actually have evidence that they actually did the things that they're supposed to do. There may not be, it's like, they looked at it.
Yep.
Or did they just click approve? And 2 people clicking approve is not more secure than one person clicking approve if nobody's looking at the code. The tools provide the data, they provide evidence, but they don't actually inherently change the behavior.
Yep, close. So if I told you, hey, Eric, I'm bringing a plate of cookies to work, and I'm going to count how many there are left at the end of the day, and that'll change how many cookies I bring in the future. Just that knowledge would change your behavior, depending upon what you wanted. I probably can't really predict how it'll change your behavior, but I can observe it. In the same way, stating we're going to be looking at pull requests for blah. I mean, how much value theater do you want? Because I can pantomime about all of these things. I can buy the latest workout gear. I can wear that stuff to the office so people think I'm a workout junkie. But I could still be sitting at my house scarfing down takeout because that's all I could feed myself. And that's more a comment on my ability to cook than anything else. But if we want those changes, monitoring is good. But how is the monitoring being perceived and received by your team? Is it inflicted or is it invited? This conversation boils down to, again, the ownership. If we want the team to change, the team has to own the change. How many teams actively spend time talking about what they value and how that comes out in their behaviors?
More than we might think, but I think not in a way that leaders of those teams do that probably more frequently. I think the question is not with how many teams have those conversations, how many team members in the team are actually engaged in the conversation.
That, exactly. And critically engaged, not just you want to talk about the words on the wall, but I own this. This is me. And especially when we want to talk about creating security, what's the personal driver for an individual developer for this? For my stuff, like, hey, HIPAA, that's someone's grandpa that I'm trying to take care of. If his information gets out, that could mean his house, or it could mean that the medical alert he needs to get to be safe goes missing. That, from me, selling point immediately. Changed my behavior overnight because I was thinking about my grandfather and how I wanted to take care of him.
You're not thinking about the company's fine that it's going to, because that doesn't even impact you. Like, it's bad. You might lose your job, so it does impact you there. But
right, but like, that's not what I care about on a day-to-day basis. But you talk to me about my granddad, I'm going to keep the fence secure so my granddad's okay. So my friend's granddad is okay. It's those stories about the real meaning behind the work that, for me, created the motivation. There are different motivators for different people. And unless we can link, here's a value and an outcome we should pursue to a value they already hold, it's not really gonna change them. They'll comply up to a degree, but some compliance, sure. But if the whole team is just complying, we haven't achieved the goal. Because again, with security, it's about writing it in a pattern that is secure, because the tools can't test it in, and going back and fixing it actively worse. But for what we know and what we can control, have we done a level of due diligence that keeps us at a level of safety and risk we're willing to accept? And we can talk all day about like, oh, you should make it so that it's their ownership, right? They own the problem when it happens. Yeah, because the developer waking up at 3 a.m. is going to be real motivated to take the extra 30 minutes during a design session 3 months from now on new software to avoid that.
As we've talked, I think we've definitely uncovered this. There's a strong relationship between habit formation, good, bad, neutral, software development, coding cycles, team leadership, right? This is a huge bundle and it's got all the threads in it that we've been touching on. But I'm curious, as we think about now, what can we take home? What can we do? What's something that we could start doing tomorrow, whether we're the developer, whether we're the security architect, whether we're the VP, whoever we are in the stories that we've been telling, what do we need to think about tomorrow from a habit formation perspective for my team to start doing this, to start writing more secure code tomorrow?
So I got good news, bad news. If you're not got hands on keyboard, you can't start influencing code tomorrow being more secure.
Right.
But depending on your layer, like if you're an individual coder, hey, that's how you start. Go start with information. Do you know what it means to be secure? And if you've got any concept like, I know I need to write a stored procedure, okay, go do a quick lookup on, hey, what's the most common security mistakes for SQL?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're going to be writing better code. I guarantee you, if you do that every day and apply what you're learning, even if it's just a little bit, your code will get better enough over time that you're going to start writing secure software. If you're trying to lead a team, I would start asking that question of what motivates your guys or gals? What do they care about? And how does security as an outcome look in your context? If you can answer those questions, it's fairly easy to then bake it into your average team cycle. Like, hey, the stories, we should think about what users are allowed to do this and when they're allowed to do it. Or like, hey, can the price adjuster for Czechoslovakia also make that change in Botswana? I mean, maybe. How do you know? Asking those kind of questions to tease out system interdependencies allows you to expose your team to the idea, oh, right, maybe we need to have a more granular look at security. If you're talking about leading teams of teams, at this level, I'd be talking to you about looking at your maintenance patterns. You're much more close to the projects and pricing and costs and values, but that also means that you can get the data aggregated up as to, hey, are your teams actively being able to even consider paying down secure debt? Do they have the tools, right? This is the realm you get to interact with. Do I have the right tools? Do I get the training? Who's most interested and most likely to succeed initially if I give it to them, right? That's a layer I would expect leaders of leaders to play at. If you're talking like CTO, at that level, the encouragement I would be taking you to is looking and taking a real hard look at your culture. What does security outcomes actually mean for the business? Frame it in terms of business goals. What's the risks? What's the cost? How does that actually come into the system? And then going the layer down, how would the daily action towards this look? And talk about developing that with the leaders below you, who should do it with the leaders below them, on down to eventually when you get a team looking at it. Because if you can change just one, you can create the cascade, but you have to change the one, reward them so that the others looking at it say, I want some of that too. And for this one, I would encourage, take a look at books like Sooner, Safer, Happier. Not just the Atomic Habits, but there's like an Atomic Habits for Business. You can go talk to James Clear for that one. But this kind of stuff, you're going to need to do some synthesis on it. And so at the seat level, if your group's not already doing security, mandating security is not going to change at day one. You're probably looking at easily 3 to 6 months before you really start seeing some of the changes trickle through.
Yeah.
And you want to go from big scale down to here's day so that people can actually make meaningful, achievable progress. And then, of course, reward the first people to jump on the bus.
I'm going to add too, real quick, you don't have to do it alone. There are people who bring expertise on these conversations, right? From navigating the team dynamics to navigating what does it mean to write secure software and what kind of metrics and tools do I need to add to make that easier. So don't go it alone. There's definitely people who can help.
So Erik, building on this, because it's an area I almost always forget about, but how do I go about finding one of those? I happen to know that in my network, you're my go-to guy for security, but what groups should other CTOs look for? What should like team leaders be looking for to know this is where I can get the support I'm looking for to grow a security muscle?
I think there's obviously lots of answers to that, but in most major cities, there's going to be several nonprofit communities, ISSA, ISACA, there's other ones. Those are always good places to start because they love answering questions. They love helping. They're very community-centered, at least here in Atlanta. And so the other chapters in the other cities are also quite willing to help. Those can be great places to start. Find that local community. And if you are not in a metro area, find the online version, right? There are equivalent online communities around all of the things that we've talked about. Another one, super easy if you're truly just trying to dive into secure software, is OWASP. That's the one. That's the global standard for writing secure software. Check out them. Check out where they may have local or online meetups. Easy places to get that piece of it started on your team. And if you write secure software for credit cards or for healthcare, HIPAA, whatever it is, it's a requirement now to have that OWASP training for every developer, every technical person on the team. So if you aren't doing that already, tomorrow is a good day to start that. Or maybe Monday if it happens to be Friday.
So kind of taking that and summarizing, find a community near you, and if not near you, find it remotely. Check out some of those online resources, NIST, OWASP, and dive into just getting aware of the world. And of course, there's the training you mentioned that OWASP can
Exactly.
provide.
Yeah. There's a ton of training providers for OWASP and a ton of information right on OWASP themselves. So somebody is listening to this and they haven't heard your voice before, Daniel. And so they should definitely go listen to the previous episode of this podcast where we did talk a lot about this from a personal and from a software development team, but without that security. But assuming that they want more, where do they need to go?
Well, first, thank you. I appreciate that. My name is Daniel Scheufler. It does not get spelled like it sounds. Go look up scheufler.tech. I'm moving my website from the scheufler.io domain they would have heard about in the last episode. But that'll be spelled SCHEUFLER.tech. And that's where you'll find my blog and links to things like the code I'm writing on GitHub or other podcasts that I may be involved in. But especially come check me out if you're looking for the application of software engineering in leadership. And that's where I've been centering a lot of my growth and discussions lately on so you understand how to do software architecture. Let's talk about the messy half, which is people, and how we do that well, using software as the analogies in the background, as well as talking about some of the organizational challenges for getting software architecture changes or security-like practices in place and successful.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And yes, please definitely go check all that information out. I've known Daniel professionally, but also through that, and it definitely is worth checking out and adding to your list of resources. As we think about, this is part 2 of a undetermined number of conversations about habit formation. Where do we think part 3 will go, if there's a part 3?
So we talked a little bit about it in terms of how do I get security moving and off the ground. I think an area that might be interesting is if we talk in terms of software as capabilities for the business. If we think about it, people write new software not because they want the shiny code we're writing, but because they want the machine to do a new thing. These are new capabilities. But as we know with any tool, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you've ever been trained on a hammer and all you've got is nails, you're going to use the screwdriver like it's a hammer. Talking about how to incorporate the understanding of we need new behaviors to go with new software so we can get the value might be an interesting twist. There's some habit formation stuff we can talk about that kind of talks meta at the organization and organizational change level. But if I had to pick, that'd be the area where I'd start digging.
Yeah, I think that is very unexplored from the conversations you and I have had. That'd be great. And that way, anyone who has listened to us this long, they're going to be there for that too.
Definitely. And of course, one of the things we should hope is that if they're listening to these episodes, they're pinging you with, hey, can you say a little more on? And that'd be a great conversation to have as well. Any kind of follow-up or questions they'd like for clarification or the wish you had said more on.
Absolutely.
More than happy to come back and revisit this because if anything I've learned, the more you change, the more it kind of stays the same. And it's coming back to the things you used to know with new eyes. Always unveils something a little bit more you could do.
I know those questions are for me. I'm on LinkedIn literally every day. I think you have a decent LinkedIn presence too, and maybe people can reach out there as well. So
be more than happy to have that conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming in again today. I appreciate the time, the conversation, the thoughts, and look forward to figuring out when part 3 happens.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for listening to EB Spoke, the podcast. This podcast was produced by Erik Boemanns, founder of the fractional CTO and CISO firm Mirability, and features a wide variety of topics. Keep listening for more topics in the future, including cybersecurity, risk, compliance, and more.